evening and good to have you with us in the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. A decision by the American voters that will have an impact across the world, as one of the most powerful countries in the world is set to see a shift at the helm of its leadership and a shift possibly in many of its policies. But how much of a shift? Well, that's what we are here to find out. To begin with, my team has pulled out a few quotes from what Joe Biden has said in the past. For example, he has been noted to say that India and US should be the closest nations in the world. But that being said, there are a lot of other factors at hand too. What does he have to say about Pakistan? In 2008, Joe Biden said Pakistan is 50 times more important than Afghanistan for United States. What did he say about China? Well, he said a lot about China, but in 2020 he said Xi Jinping is a guy who is a thug. In 2012, he said Xi Jinping is prepared to show a friendly side of China. Biden's own campaign website has comments to make on Citizenship Amendment Act, which has been a law that our parliament has passed. And the campaign website says, disappointed with the Indian government over CAA. It also talks about Kashmir and that the Indian government should restore rights of Kashmiris, preventing peaceful protest weaken democracies. But of course, it goes beyond what you say in campaigns. Let me tell you that. What you say in your campaign rallies and interviews or even in posts that you've held otherwise can be very, very different than when you are the President of United States sitting in Oval Office and representing that entire country in 2020. So here are some other reasons why we believe India needs to perhaps wait and watch. Pakistan claims Biden is likely to mend the sour ties between the two countries. Under Trump's regime, several strict steps were taken against Pakistan. Pakistan is hoping that will now change. Many experts do say that Biden is unlikely to take Trump's tough stand against China as well. He's yet to make stand clear on the India-China line of actual control issue. He has raised issues over India's internal matters like CAA, NRC, and of course Kashmir. So tonight, let's break it down for our viewers and ask our experts. Will Joe Biden be good for India? Can it really be a blanket thing, as many people are saying and celebrating that he's been elected to office, and that's great news for India as well? Will he go soft on China? Is Biden's presidency good news for our neighbors, including China and Pakistan? Will it have an impact on our economy, our trade ties, our visa issues and visa hurdles? That's one big thing on the mind of many, many Indians today. We're going to break down the conversation into trade and business. We're going to talk about the entire region and our neighbors and how those ties might get impacted. We, of course, will talk about India-China and if that has any, and if Biden's presidency is going to have any bearing on that. We'll talk about defense. Let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining me right now. Maruf Raza, strategic affairs expert and a consulting editor to the Times Network, joins us this evening. I also have Harshvi Pant, Director for Studies and Head of Strategic Studies Program at ORF, joining us this evening. Manjeet Kriplani, Executive Director for Gateway House. And Mark Davis, Global Chairman for Davis & Associates LLC, joins us this evening. Thank you to all of you for being with us this evening. Maruf, I want to actually start off with what's been on top of our minds for the last several months, and that is our own issues with China and the world's confrontation or handling of China. Do you see that change? Do you see US's attitude change under Joe Biden?
You see, the first couple of points that I wish to make is that, there is a certain consistency with American foreign policy vis-a-vis India, and that is going to continue. Please remember that Biden was vice president to Mr. Obama when Obama decided to engage India rather extensively and calling it really the partnership for the 21st century. And therefore, much of that, as I'm sure, rubbed off on Mr. Biden, but we should shed any notions of his vice president to be Ms. Harris going to toe a favorable line towards India purely because of her ancestral links here. policies are not made on emotion. I couldn't say that entirely about President Trump, because the only certainty about him was his uncertain actions that would happen from time to time. But there are 3 or 4 things about President-elect Biden, which I probably can bet on. One is the fact that there is going to be a certain degree of rivalry with China, and this goes beyond Sino-Indian rivalry. There are issues that America takes very seriously about China having encroached upon the American markets because of concessions that were given by the West over the last decade or more. And those issues are very serious, and it's difficult for America to disentangle itself entirely from China, which is really the world's main manufacturing base even now. The second is Sino-Indian rivalry would draw in the Americans to some extent, but what is more important is that America would continue to see India as a very important market for many of their high-tech defense products, if and when they decide to give them to us. Much of that, as some of us know, need the president's approval before, even if companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, whoever else wish to sell that to India, they have to get White House's approval. So to that extent, I don't think there'll be much stalling there because of now the foundational agreements coming in place. But the one area that I'm going to watch very carefully is Mr. Biden's reopening of engagement with Iran, because that is going to, allow us more opportunity to build up on the Chabahar port investment, and B, it will allow Iran to begin engaging with India, at least, if not many other countries, with its oil resources. And that's going to flood the oil markets in the world, because America, which used to be one of the big importers, is now probably the biggest exporter in the world. And America, certainly, Mr. Biden is not going to take very kindly to a Saudi Arabia led by Prince MBS, Mohammed bin Sultan, because of a variety of reasons, including the alleged murder of the Washington Post journalist, Mr. Khashoggi. So there are issues there which are both moral and strategic. There are some areas which we should remain alert to, a certain amount of questioning on how we run our internal business. We'll have a lot of people crying hoarse to say those are internal matters, whether they are CAA or NRC or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that America likes to see itself as the global policeman for human rights. So it's going to come down on India pretty strongly on that score. And lastly, and most importantly, we are going to see, I think, America's focus shift more towards Pakistan from Afghanistan, because Pakistan really holds the key to a number of issues on Afghanistan, whether American troop pullout, whether terrorism, whether Pakistan being the lackey of China and therefore giving China the toehold into the Arabian Sea waters. These are issues that I think Mr. Biden is going to be a little more aggressive on than President Trump. Back to you, Tanvi.
Okay, thanks, Maru, so much for breaking it down, in such a manner. Let me take that and go across to Harsh on this. Then, Harsh, many are saying that, well, we can heave a sigh of relief because, well, Joe Biden is a familiar face. He's back in the Oval Office, and at least now we know what we are getting into and which way and how to tackle this. What is your own sense of how the Indian-US ties could go from here?
Thanks, Tanvi. I think my own sense is that US-India ties, for a number of reasons, are only going to grow stronger. But that is not to say that, whenever an administration comes, we should forget the past and concentrate on the present and now. And I think that's a challenge, right? When you were talking about campaign and when you were talking about what was said, you campaign in prose, you govern. You campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. So when the matters of governance are concerned, things change. We forget every time there is a change of government, change of administration in America, we have similar debates in India and as there are in other countries. But I think where India is concerned, we have seen those debates becoming a bit less relevant given the trajectory of the evolution of the relationship. You can go back to Mr. Obama, who came to office saying that if I have to resolve Afghanistan, I first have to look at Kashmir, who came to office as a great opponent of the civil nuclear deal. By the time he left office, he was one of the greatest proponents of US-India ties. We also forget that when Donald Trump came to office, there was a big hullabaloo in India. Look, someone is coming to office who's going to be transactionalist. Oh my God, what are we going to give to him? How much pressure is he going to bear on India? At the end of his 4 years, we can safely conclude that India managed to get a much better deal than some of Mr. Trump's closest allies. So I think as Mr. Trump transitions into office, as Mr. Biden transitions into office, we have to be realistic and take it as it comes. It's going to be a bouquet. It's going to be a combination of both goods, some goodies there and some problem areas. And I think if we understand where he is coming from, if we understand how America has changed even from the time when he was vice president, we will be able to better understand his priorities. If we think that his past is going to be any kind of a guide for the future, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. The world has changed, America has changed, and I think we need to be cognizant of the reality that India too has changed. It's not simply a question of where America matters in Indian foreign policy calculus. It's also a question of where India matters in American foreign policy calculus. And unless we get that right, that the question, we are constantly going to hammer and we are constantly going to go back and forth on what Mr. Biden means for India. I think there is also a question of what India means for Mr. Biden's foreign policy vision. And I have no doubt that India plays a very important role. How our diplomats, how American diplomacy navigates these challenges amidst a domestic political transition and a crisis in America, that's the challenge for both India and America. And I hope that both these democracies are able to transcend that challenge.
Okay, fair enough. You make a very valid point. Let Amanjeet Kriplani, would you like to come in here? The fact also is that our own diplomacy and style of diplomacy and style of handling issues, even when it comes to United States, has significantly changed in the last few years. The current government is also very clear of where it wants to assert itself to the extent it does. But of course, there are a few issues where we have to keep multiple factors at hand. So, to your mind, not just about what Biden means for India, but what we can do for US at this point, for trade and for international relations, or rather for relations with China and Pakistan, how do you see US-India ties headed?
So Tanvi, that's a good question. And I'm going to start by saying that we have to become adults, India. We've always been sort of waiting for other people to help us. It's time now. You're absolutely right. We should be helping others. So, Mr. Trump did some things right. He called out China. He lowered taxes that Indian business is increasingly in the US. He brought the end of unquestioning globalization that really only made multinationals wealthy, but India has been on the benefiting side, and China, of course. He smashed OPEC by becoming self-sufficient in energy, and the US is now a major natural gas exporter, and India is buying some of that natural gas. And he ended the forever wars. So to take each of these, let's start with the forever wars. In Afghanistan, we've always been hiding behind US skirts. No more. We really have to take independent decisions on Afghanistan beyond simply building, parliamentary buildings. On energy, we are doing for the United States something because Mr. Trump was so transactional. He wanted something for his efforts. And so we buy almost 10% of our natural gas comes from the US. And to refer to what Maruf said, what Biden does with Iran is extremely important, but also, Maruf, if Iran comes back into the oil market, it's going to take away from India buying US natural gas. So in a way, the US sort of forced India because the US became self-sufficient in energy and you smashed OPEC, we are no longer slaves to OPEC and those high oil prices. We now have a diversity of energy sources, which we are now choosing to get from the US. So although Trump sort of took the US out of the Paris Agreement, he has in fact, made a big polluter like India actually move into gas. And where India can take the lead this time and has helped the US, and I think will, is two things. One is the TikTok ban in June this year, when the Chinese PLA stepped into our northern borders. That is an act of asymmetric warfare against China. It blew TikTok's IPO, in the US, and the resistance to the app has been followed by similar assessments in the West, particularly in the US. We don't know what's happened to TikTok yet. Biden will have to take a decision on that. And the second thing is India has begun to operationalize the Quad because there were only exercises. Australia was always excluded from the Malabar exercises. But by India inviting Australia, we now have a Quad exercise. In terms of investment, the US has put $20 billion into social media and technology just in June this year. We are the world's second largest digitized citizenry. The question is, which digital camp would India be in? Will it be in the US camp, where US companies call the shot? Will it be in Europe's camp, where the customers kind of call the shot? We're not in China's camp, where the state calls the shots. But middle powers like Canada, Australia, Japan, UK, can we come together and create a digital model that is neither state-centric nor firm-centric, but rather open source and citizen-centric? And lastly, pharma and health. Ongoing collaboration in pharma is going to lower healthcare costs in both countries, India and the US.
Yeah.
60% of US generics are Indian. And we are going to urgently develop either the COVID vaccine or therapeutics, which is the cocktails. As you know, Cipla created the AIDS cocktail. And we will have similar therapeutics coming out, and also biological warfare deterrence. H-1B visas, I have to say, I'm not too stressed about it. Whatever Biden does, it's fine. But this pandemic has made sure that everybody stays home and Indians are looking inward. It's a good thing.
Well, I do want to come to you again, and I'll come back to you more on the pharma and the vaccine part, because I think that's on top of everyone's mind, keeping in light of the announcement that Pfizer has just made. So, Manjeet, I will come back to you on that. Maruf, do you want to respond to her before I go across to Mark on the immigration and visa expectations?
Yeah, I mean, Manjeet has made some very good points, and I know she's very well informed. My only point about Iran was that with Saudi Arabia not finding, over the years now, it's not after Mr. Biden comes in, a market in the US, the Saudis have been looking desperately at India as at a market. Likewise, some of the other Gulf countries. But the point I was trying to make, that there would be a possibility of more oil in the market, and we've not actually transitioned away from the need for oil and gas, which comes from the soils of these countries, to alternate energy models like renewable energy or nuclear energy or wind energy. And therefore, I mean, we remain dependent on, for a variety of reasons, to oil and gas coming in from the Gulf countries. And it's going to be the case for a long time till we get our act together on other aspects. And therefore, the importance of these as supplies. Yes, I know the Americans have been giving us shale gas, and some $2 billion worth have come in over the last year and a half. But then again, it's a small amount considering the fact that, we do put in something close to 3.5% of our GDP towards import of energy, from much of them coming from the Gulf countries. So there is that extra option available to us. Our refineries are tuned to Iranian oil. It's sweeter and easier to refine. And more importantly, ever since it went off the market, despite OPEC's promises, it was not able to make up the shortfall. And it's just because of the COVID that there was less consumption. Otherwise, we would have to have been paying a higher price for petroleum and gas-related products. The other aspect is that, yes, Mr. Biden's coming in is going to give a bigger shot in the arm to renewable energy and such kind of alternate energy mechanisms. And I think that may appear a bit difficult for our energy-centric oil importers and our government. But over a period of time, the government's own blueprint is talking about shifting our dependence from oil and gas to other means like renewable energy and possibly nuclear energy in the next 10 years. So this is a good thing in the long run for our economy. And the third and most important aspect is all this is going to put Russia in a bit of a spot because the oil prices will fall and Russia's economy is as it is having a problem because of COVID, and therefore it is much dependent on oil export, is the biggest exporter outside of OPEC, and therefore it needs the money and less money is going to come in. That's going to put pressure on Russia to act maybe aggressively to try and throw threats into the world geopolitical situation. And if Mr. Biden gets America back and involved in NATO, it's going to get Russia's back up further. That's going to lead to a Russia-China bonding of the sort we've heard about in the past as a possibility, but I see that evolving into a reality very soon.
All right. I'm just going to, for a bit, though, step away from this larger global dynamic conversation and get a little, specific about how for a person in our country, life may or may not change. And by that, I mean, of course, the whole issue about immigration and specifically about the H-1B visa rules. Now, I am looking at what the campaign document or the policy document for Joe Biden promised. And it said that high-skilled temporary visas should not be used to disincentivize recruiting workers already in U.S. for in-demand occupation. Biden will work with Congress to first reform temporary visas to establish a wage-based allocation process and establish enforcement mechanisms to ensure they are aligned with the labor market, not used to undermine wages, of course. But there is a larger expectation, Mark Davis, and thank you for patiently waiting, but there is a large expectation in India that perhaps this could mean easier visa norms. Is that a fair assumption?
Well, I think you have to look at this in two ways. You have to look at it long-term and short-term. Long-term, even the Obama administration, under which obviously Mr. Biden served, was curtailing the H-1B visa program. There's a political reality, I would say, in the United States, is that the feeling is that the H-1B program is out of date and needs reform. The other point about long-term change is this, that whilst the president Biden may be the president of the United States, he's unable to enact new laws unless they pass the Senate. So at the current time, we're still waiting to see whether the Democrats will take control of the U.S. Senate or not. If they take control of the U.S. Senate, passing larger scale immigration reform is going to be a lot easier. If they don't retake the Senate, or if they don't take the Senate, then it's going to be extremely difficult. And what we've seen, sort of from a long-term perspective in the US with immigration now for a very long time, is no administration being able to make long-term reforms. So, long-term, you're still seeing, doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican government in place, you're seeing the H-1B visa program being curtailed, and their ability to make changes to that program will be limited unless they win the Senate as well. In the short term, it is true that Trump tried to put restrictions on the H-1B visa program, some of which have been thrown out by the courts, others of which still stand. Those are things that Biden can make an immediate impact to. So I do think that there will be a short-term easing in the H-1B program, but the type of reform that's needed to bring the H-1B visa program into a point where it reflects the modern economic activity between India and the United States may still be a very long way off, sort of we have to wait and see. The other point I'd like to make is international trade and business, because the Trump administration certainly did not shut down the US investment visa programs, and we've seen encouragement of those programs. During the COVID period, a lot of our clients, Indian clients, have successfully opened businesses in the United States and have received payments from the United States government to support their US elements to their Indian businesses. So I would agree with some of the other commentators that the long-term prognosis of the India-US trade cross-border investment axis is a very important one, and the US immigration network and procedures still allow for that today, and they will do in the future. The H-1B it's obviously very important for the Indian IT business. And, I refer to the comments I just made. Short term, I think we could see some positive changes. Long term, I think that with change in the Senate, probably unlikely, we'll see. I'm not sure how much change he will be able to put through.
Okay, that's actually a very interesting point. Mark Davis, thank you so much for joining us and, shedding light on that angle. Harsh, very quickly, the point that Mark makes about, pushing through the policies through the Senate. And this is something that we often forget back home, that it's not just about who's sitting in Oval Office. It's also about what kind of strength they have in their own houses, much like in our country. And unless they have a lot of say there, too many things may not change.
Tanvi, that to me is the most important point of today's discussion. In some ways, the most important point in the context of Biden administration. What is the political mandate today telling Mr. Biden? The political mandate that he has got is telling Mr. Biden that Trump may be out, but Trumpism is there, is alive and well. And therefore, the 47% of Americans who didn't vote for Mr. Biden have voted for a certain idea of what kind of America they want to live in. And so there are constraints on Mr. Biden. There will be constraints on Mr. Biden, not simply because he might not get the Senate he perhaps wanted, but also the fact that the kind of blue wave that was projected never happened. And so the reality is that America today is a divided country. America today is a polarized country. America today is a country where Mr. Biden, if he has to govern properly, and which he has said that he wants to listen to those who did not vote for him. And if you see his campaign platform, if you read that platform seriously, you will find what he says. He's very categorical that American policies, that my policies will reflect American middle class priorities. It will reflect American workers' priorities. So basically, he's appealing to what Mr. Trump called America first, that his priorities would be to first put American priorities in place. And therefore, whether you talk of immigration, whether you talk of trade, it's not going to change dramatically. It's not going to happen overnight that tomorrow we are going to get a trade deal with the Americans. It's not going to happen overnight that immigration laws are going to change. I think Mark is absolutely right that what we are going to see is perhaps a short-term change, but the long-term trajectory of the immigration policy is very clear. It's not going to revert back to the Clintonian internationalism. There's going to be much more restricted space for immigration. There's much more tighter controls are going to be there. And that's something that we have to live with. And therefore, we have to understand where Mr. Biden will be coming from and what kind of political turbulence he'll be navigating. And one other important, if I may, one important element that he will be navigating will be the intra-democratic party turbulence. Within his party, there are progressive liberals that are called progressives. There are conservative Democrats like him, centrist Democrats, and how he balances them out is going to be a major factor in determining his policies. At the moment, there is going to be a lot of internecine warfare within the Democratic Party, and at the moment, it's not clear who will win this intra-Democratic Party shift. So I think there is a lot that is going to happen from now till January, and we'll have to wait and watch the space.
Yes, well, when he says that we want to, and I'm the president for everybody in this country, and, when people talk about unifying people under Joe Biden, perhaps he needs to start off with his own party. You're absolutely right there, Professor Harsh. Manjeet, if I can come back to you on the point that you made about the pharma industry. Right now, as we speak, what Pfizer has said has obviously triggered a lot of conversation and excitement across the world. Now, India being a pharmaceutical manufacturing hub, do we expect that at some point it would have to be the leaderships of the two sides and the two governments who will have to sit across the table and have a conversation about how, if this US finds the vaccine, how do we manufacture it for them and for the rest of the world, and what do we get out of it?
I think it's pretty clear that that all countries are actually putting their heads and hands together to make this work. And I think for India, it's clear that if India is going to manufacture the vaccine or the therapeutics for this, it is going to be kept aside for the developing world and for the weakest. India knows how to do this. We know how to manufacture it cheap, and maybe people in the wealthier world will have to pay for it, and people in the underdeveloped world will not. So, Tanvi, one very interesting thing, what used to be a purely private sector driven bilateral, really H1Bs and pharmaceuticals, has now become or developed a very strong government to government base.
Yeah.
So the pharma sector, which was totally private, is now going to have government to government understanding, and that's fantastic. And so we won't be hearing all these noises, coming from the pharmaceutical industry saying India doesn't give us market access, etc. The American companies have been in India for the longest time. I mean, Abbott has been here for 105 years. And so they make a lot of profits, they do very well. But I think this is the time for them to also put their, just collaborate here and in the US, especially here for the manufacture of the medication. So I think we'll see something very exciting coming out of the US-India space particularly.
Yes, you're absolutely right, which is why I am very curious to see how this pans out, and how, while Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government has made it very clear that, we are preparing and we are ready to provide the vaccine to the entire world, be the manufacturers to everybody, how at the end of the day we deal with this with other governments and work with them and coordinate to ensure that not only does the rest of the world get it, but also 1.3 billion people in our country get it on as soon as a possible basis will be very interesting. Before I wrap this up, one final question with Maruf, and I come back to what we started with China, because as we speak, there are still, reports emerging of conversations between India and China and a possible thaw maybe as the winter sets in. Can we expect, or do we even want United States to play a role there?
So certainly not in terms of America becoming the peacemaker. India has always been allergic to two things. One is to alliances, and the other is anybody coming and becoming the country that puts two countries like India or Pakistan or India or China together and end up trying to be the third party to what is India sees as clearly a bilateral issue. Where America could possibly come in, and there also there are question marks, is in case a border confrontation expands into a larger one, which includes the maritime context. And that is where the arrangements in the naval front will come to bear. Yes, America would be, even before that happens, providing us a fair amount of satellite-based intelligence, particularly after DECA has been signed. And not that we were not receiving it earlier. But the important thing is that, Mr. Biden is not going to walk into White House and walk into a confrontation which could explode into a much larger one. And some doomsday predictions say that this could be the start of a world war. I don't see that happening immediately. But therefore, we have to move forward. But I also am pessimistic about India and China, either side backing off into what could be a quick solution to the defined lines on the boundary. There are issues on both sides. We need to understand those issues. For too long, we've had an ostrich-like attitude to the Chinese. So to that extent, Galwan and thereafter has been a good wake-up call for us. And now we are reorienting ourselves. Having said that, there is a lot that America hopes for from India as a pivot to a number of American strategies in Asia. And India is the only country that America expects to provide a suitable partnership as a counter to China's hegemonistic designs. So there are issues. I know some of these terms are difficult to explain in a short TV program.
Yes.
But quite clearly, India-China rivalry now is there to stay. And America is on China's side. One last point. It has been said, and I think there is a strong possibility of that in 2021 and beyond, that Mr. Biden would revive the idea of a concert of democracies, if I was to borrow a phrase from the post-World War I era 100 years ago. And if that happens, then I think India would be joining in that. in as much as India would be working closely with the United States in the UN Security Council from January onwards, where we are there for 2 years.
Okay.
So opportunities for India are many. Let's see how we play our cards and not squander them.
All right. Thank you so much to you, Maruf, to Professor Harsh, and always a pleasure to have Manjit Kriplani with us. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us on this special conversation. We'll wait and watch beginning January what happens and how it changes for us. But good to have you with us on this conversation. I'm going to go across to Mr. Ira Melman, senior correspondent for Voice of America, joining us live right now from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much, Mr. Melman, for being with us on Mirror Now. Before you joined us, we were actually having a conversation of, what can we possibly expect as the changes or the impact of a Joe Biden presidency for India. But let me begin by asking you, is it going to be all smooth sailing from here on for Joe Biden till January? Or do we expect President Trump to actually follow up on his threats of legal action?
Nobody really knows for certain whether what he is going to do. And we're talking about the President Trump right now. He is fighting. You probably have already discussed it. He is battling in the court starting today the victory that was called by the media. And keep in mind, it was only called by the media. All of the votes are not yet in. So therefore, he's not really officially president-elect. And this is being shown by the Biden group calling a federal agency that officially must declare him the winner. But they are saying no. The head of the GAO is saying that she is not going to issue a letter that he is now the president-elect until all of the votes are in, and possibly if all of the court cases that are being filed in the states where they were very close, notably Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona and a few more. So it might take a while before he officially is the president-elect.
Well, our understanding also is, and you're right, that the votes are yet to be fully counted. There are legal suits which are already on, some of them seeking a halt on this counting as well. But December 14th is when the Electoral College would formally elect the president and the vice president. Would that then be a safe timeline to look at for us to get clarity? Or would you expect, Mr. Melman, that America will have clarity sooner than that?
It might be sooner than that. As has been the case over the Trump administration, there are aides to Donald Trump on either side of the situation. Some are telling him, give this up. You did not lead, you did not win the overall vote. In fact, you lost by 2 million or so. And now some of them are saying, look, just concede, just be right about it, be the way it's always been done here in the United States, a peaceful transition. And by peaceful, I just mean the way it is set down in what has happened for hundreds of years now, or to continue the stance that he has, which could lead to more and more problem. There are some stories circulating this morning that some of his aides are saying he should go back, Donald Trump should go back on the campaign trail and spread the accusations that he has been making, so far unwarranted. So far being called lies by many journalistic agencies, and fight for this. And you just don't know what is going to happen, which side he is going to choose. And who knows what happens if the date in December, when the Electoral College gathers, whether or not that will happen. We just don't know. There are too many questions, but the Biden administration seems to be going ahead wherever it can go ahead, starting with some things he says he will do on his first day in office.
Yes, so he started talking about the set of things that he would do on the first day in office. He's already indicated that he's attending briefings. He's being briefed on crucial issues from tackling COVID, the state of COVID, to the state of economy for United States. But during this point, usually, Mr. Melman, between the voting results and January, when the actual handover takes place, what do the president-elects do? How much of this time do they actually spend on official president-elect things that Biden should ideally be doing right now?
It's whatever he can do. And what he has been doing is saying and putting out on a website that they have put out everything he plans to do, as you mentioned, immediately. But when it is official that he is the president-elect. Until then, they can't really do that much. Now, however, the situation is that Joe Biden has been in the U.S. Congress, had been in the U.S. Congress before becoming vice president to Barack Obama for decades. He has many, many friends in the Congress, in both the House and the Senate. So can he do anything in order to shake things up a little bit? Nobody knows as yet, or even if he will try. There are more questions than there are answers, I'm sorry to tell you.
I think with President Trump also, still involved and at the helm, that's been a case that we've gotten used to, that there are more questions than answers. There's a lot of unpredictability in what's going to happen. It's very difficult to judge. But Mr. Melman, my last question, when he says he's not going to leave office, when President Trump says he's not ready to leave office, what does that mean?
That means that if he refuses to leave office up until the inauguration, or just before the inauguration of Joe Biden, when that takes place, that he could be ousted. A letter has been sent on this day, as a matter of fact, to the Pentagon from former and retired generals and other VIPs, saying that the Army should be used to physically remove him from the White House, saying he's trespassing, that he's not the president anymore. And that there are others that say, no, that's not going to happen, but the Secret Service must do that. Who the Army, who the Secret Service listens to, who is legally the president, especially if he's legally the president-elect, and then the president, Donald Trump, would be trespassing and could be escorted out of the White House as a trespasser.
Well, that would be unprecedented indeed. I hope that doesn't happen. And
me either. That would be quite unpresidential as well. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Melman, it's been a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you, Tom. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.